I have a little painting here that's in your book, and I kind of, somehow I flipped this around in your notes. I won't hold you responsible for this one, but this is Roger van der Weiden's painting of St. Luke painting the Virgin Mary and Christ child. Van der Weyden did one of these, Jan van Eyck did one of these. In the one Jan van Eyck did, Chancellor Rollin is witnessing. So the same guy that commissioned the hospital Last Judgment polyptych by Roger van der Weyden also had Jan van Eyck insert him into a painting with this format. These became very popular. And there was a legend, and it was a legend, it's not in the Bible, but there was a legend that came out of the Byzantine Empire around the 6th century that said that St. Luke, who was one of the evangelists, one of the writers of the New Testament, had this mystical moment where the Virgin Mary and the infant Christ child appeared to him, and then he painted that, he captured that, and that it was a miracle that this occurred. When I talk here about self-promotion and professional propaganda, this idea that St. Luke, a saint, had this moment where he made a painting, and in this instance he's actually just making a drawing. This kind of gave divine credit to what artists do. Basically said artists do really important things. They do these paintings that are very, very spiritual paintings. I wanted to include this, but I don't think this is a major van der Weyden either. It's actually pretty much a copy of how Jan van Eyck went about this. But I want you to think about that connection between this mystical vision and St. Luke actually painting it. Now, I'm going to show you two Bouts paintings. This is the one that is the better of the two, and this thing is only 8 by 6. So this is that big. But it's a beautiful Virgin and Child. It's really lovely. And just think about, look at this depiction of the Virgin Mary. And think about how we've seen her. How we've seen her depicted as the Queen of Heaven. Does she look like the Queen of Heaven here? What's your feelings about how she's depicted?
It's almost like you can kind of take her being the Virgin Mary away. It just looks like a sweet, tender moment between a mother and a child, and it's not giving any importance necessarily one way or the other, but just showing that like relationship at its purest form in a way.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, when I look at that portrayal, it had to have been a model, you know? It had to have been a portrait. And she's obviously a very beautiful woman, but she's not beautiful along necessarily conventional lines. There's just this really wonderful personal quality of beauty to her. They talk about how big her hands are. She's got these, you know, like farmer's wife hands. She has these large, very physical hands, and they're big enough to just kind of serve as a little throne for the baby. And the baby's adorable, okay? He's much cuter than most babies you're going to see in this class. And then look how tender it is where he's got his hand on her chest, the other arm, their lips are touching, their eyes are looking. It's just a really beautiful, tender moment, right? Some of the northern painters were really good at this. Derek Bouts was good at it, and Hans Memling, who we'll look at in a moment, was good at it. So I think this is maybe the best thing he's ever done. And this is in New York, so you can go to the Metropolitan Museum of Art and see this painting. We don't have lots of great Northern Renaissance paintings in North America, but we have some. This is more typical of Dirk Bouts. So this is the Last Supper. This is actually from an altarpiece. I'm just showing you the central panel. But I want to show this because this is what makes him a lesser artist than Jan and Roger. And again, I know I mentioned this briefly. So this painting we know is commissioned by a confraternity. So the Confraternity of the Holy Sacrament in Louvain, that's a city up in the Netherlands, they were the ones that commissioned this piece. And in doing that, there are members of the confraternity whose portraits are painted and they're injected into the Last Supper. Does that make sense? These guys, these are not saints. These are just ordinary, upper middle class Dutch businessmen. A confraternity was kind of like the Kiwanis or the Lions Club or something like that, the Shriners. It was a group of wealthy merchants, businessmen, that would get together and they would do religious services. They weren't monks, but they would do things for the church and for religion. Mm-hmm.
Like Rockford's Knights of Columbus?
Exactly. Exactly. So that's what a confraternity basically was. Mm-hmm. You do need to know what a confraternity is. I think that's on your vocabulary list. But, I mostly want you just to understand how the commission aspect works here. So now, this is kind of interesting because it's the Last Supper. Does that make sense? When you see Christ and the disciples at a table, that will be a Last Supper image. But the thing that's kind of odd about it is Christ is acting as a priest. You can see what he's doing. He's holding a communion wafer. He's blessing the wafer. And he's actually working as a priest, which is odd because when you have a Catholic Mass, you're basically reliving the Last Supper every time you have a Catholic Mass. The actual Last Supper is part of the symbolism and ritual of the Mass. And Christ's body is turned into bread, his blood is turned into wine that's shared with all the people in the congregation. So it's an odd thing to have Christ doing that. It's almost like in a way, you could look at it almost as a parody of what's going on, but it just kind of re-emphasizes the mysticism of that process. So Christ is serving as priest at his own Last Judgment, or at his own Last Supper. The thing that's clunky about the piece is the heads are very large, and the heads are not as carefully painted. Christ's head is really a disaster if you look at it as far as proportions are concerned. Very, very long face, very short forehead. If you do that in my life drawing class, Frank can tell you, I'll yell at you. No, I won't yell at you, but I'll tell you, he needs more cranium because he's got a math class later in the afternoon. He needs to have room for his brain. So he's just not as strong. He does a good job with the drapery, he does a good job with painting surfaces, but he doesn't have that same quality, ability, at least in these larger panel paintings, that we see consistently with Jan and Roger. The linear perspective is really pretty good in this, but people will point out that the linear perspective in this side hall is actually different than the linear perspective in the main room. It's not quite the same. So there again, not quite perfect. So Bounce is cool, and he's certainly a follower of Jan and a follower of Roger, but not quite on the same level. And then the next guy, same thing. Peter Christos was a direct follower of Jan van Eyck, worked in his workshop and finished some of his pieces. And again, this guy was really, really great at painting the brocaded fabrics and surfaces, but not as good at painting the faces as what we'll see with Jan and Roger, not as strong. But this is a cool piece. This is called a goldsmith in his shop, possibly St. Eligius. Okay, there's an argument about this, and it's looking more and more like it's not St. Eligius. It was just a goldsmith that was painted. So it was more than likely commissioned by the Goldsmith Guild for a painting to be placed in a town hall somewhere to give credence and credit to their guild. We do know at some point there was a halo painted around St. Eligius, but that's been removed because when they cleaned this painting, they realized that had been added later. So what our historians are saying now is originally it was painted just as a goldsmith, perhaps a portrait of a particular goldsmith. Then at some point someone decided to turn the goldsmith into St. Eligius, an actual saint, and now after an actual restoration, they removed that. Keep in mind, you can paint, you could paint a tattoo on St. Eligius on this painting. And 20 years down the road, they can come in and remove that without damaging the paint that's underneath. So restorers can do pretty marvelous things, and the kind of philosophy right now with restoration is, if it's not original, get rid of it. Get it the hell out of there, because it was probably never meant to be there to begin with. So that's what they've done with this. Otherwise, it's very Van Eyckian in its symbolism. So we basically have a young lady and a male companion. We're not sure of the relationship of the male companion, but they seem like they're husband and wife, or at least engaged to be married. And they're visiting the goldsmith shop. And the goldsmith is basically weighing out metal in front of a window. And how can we tell that we're looking through a window in this piece?
A mirror.
Right. So there's a mirror, there's a nice Jan van Eyck mirror laying on the table here. And the mirrors were convex back then. The mirrors were convex because it was difficult to blow them flat, to get a large flat piece. So oftentimes they had this kind of convex surface. And if we look in that, the reflection shows outside into the street, and we see two people, and one of them has a little falcon. So they're reasonably wealthy people. One of them is active in the sport of falconry, which was not a cheap pursuit at that time. This is a wedding girdle that we see here. Heavily brocaded garment that the young lady's wearing with this marvelous headdress. The headdresses are really cool during this period. And then the man has a little medallion that actually, the medallion itself actually represents a certain family. So because of that, we're thinking that she might have been Mary of Guelders, and she would end up marrying James II of Scotland, a Scottish king. So there again, you can't overlook anything when you look at these things. And then this is all in the jeweler's shop. We have coral in here. The actual cup that we see here is made out of coconut. Coconut was an extremely difficult material to find in Northern Europe. It had to be brought in from the tropics. This was supposed to cure poison, to remove the effects of poison. And the coral was actually meant to ward off the evil eye. There's shark's teeth that we see here, the little fossilized shark's teeth, and they call those dragon's teeth, and those are also meant to ward off the evil eye. And then there's various stones